Welcome to the Prairie Oaks Pulpit Bible Study. We're back on my couch after a week off, and we are still going through the book of Exodus, and this is a continuation, but it's something completely different. In that you'll remember that God came to them, condescended upon Mount Sinai to make a covenant with the children of Israel, that his presence would dwell within their midst. And they made that covenant, and the next part of it was receiving instruction for how God would dwell in their midst. And while Moses was receiving the instructions for the tabernacle, the children of Israel were already violating the covenant. And so that we know popularly as the golden calf episode. They sinned against God in a horrible way right here in the midst of making the covenant. And Moses intercedes, and God warns Moses that this isn't going to work. His holiness, his righteousness, if he was to dwell in their midst, they would all die. But Moses says, we're not leaving Mount Sinai without you, God. You can offer us the whole promised land with its milk and honey, but we're not leaving unless we have you with us. We want your presence. And so the Lord then agrees that his presence will go with them. And Moses asks for a sign of that, an evidence of that. He wants more of God, and he asks to see God's presence. But he won't get that. Instead, he will get the name of God proclaimed to him there on Mount Sinai, as God covers them with his own hand within the cleft of the rock and proclaims the name of the Lord, Lord God, compassionate, and he is gracious. He is slow to anger. He is abounding in covenant love and abounding in faithfulness. He is rich in steadfast covenant love, forgiving moral iniquity, forgiving rebellion, and forgiving sin, but by no means clearing the guilty, but will visit the iniquity of the fathers for generation to generation of those who hate him. And so Moses has this promise from God. He will dwell with them. But what is that going to look like? Will it still be this tabernacle that was described? And how is that going to work with these people? The answer is in Exodus 35 through 40. It is the people preparing a place for the presence of God. It is them preparing a place for the presence of God according to his instructions, according to his commands. We used to sing a song at church camp and Vacation Bible School, Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, just for you. I don't remember all the words of it, but you get the picture there of him being in us, and we are the sanctuary. And so this is what's taking place. They are preparing a sanctuary. And so we're going to look at several verses here. It's a little different today. We're going to look at several verses as we go through this. So Exodus 35, and I'm going to begin in verses 20 and 21, and then we'll look at also verse 29. And so the children of Israel, they have Moses' instructions that God gave him and said, this is what is to happen. We need these supplies. It is gold, silver, bronze, lumber, beautiful colored threads and jewels and special stones and oil and spices and a lot of things you wouldn't expect a bunch of slaves to have. So verse 20 says of Exodus 35, "And all the congregation of the children of Israel departed from the presence of Moses. Then everyone came whose heart was stirred, everyone whose spirit was willing, and they brought the Lord's offering for the work of the tabernacle of meeting, for all its service, and for the holy garments. They came, both men and women, as many as had a willing heart, and brought earrings and nose rings and rings and necklaces and all jewelry of gold, that is, every man who made an offering of gold to the Lord." And it just keeps going, the things that they brought. But it says that everyone whose heart was stirred and everyone whose spirit was willing. They were gifted to give, and they gave. In fact, it says the children of Israel, verse 29, brought a free will offering to the Lord. All the men and women whose hearts were willing to bring material for all kinds of work which the Lord, by the hand of Moses, had commanded to be done. And so they gather these things together. Where did these group of slaves come up with these possessions? Gold, silver, bronze, where would they have gotten these things? Tanned skins, lumber, valuables they had no means to replace, but they were gladly giving them away to the Lord's work. What were they giving away? What the Egyptians had given them. Because you'll remember back in Exodus 12, it says that as they were headed out of town, now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them whatever they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. And so from the Egyptians, they had received these things on their way out of town to go worship. And normally, plunder was received by defeating an enemy and stealing their goods. But in this case, surprise, the Lord does things his way. They asked, and the Egyptians gave it to them. They're like, "Here, take our stuff. We'd be glad to get rid of you and our stuff just to be rid of you." And so they gave these things, which was fulfilling the promise of God, which means that the stuff really belonged to God in the first place. It was not their own, it belonged to God. I want you to take a little detour for a second here. This is going to be echoed again when David begins to gather supplies for the building of the tabernacle, or the temple, which would replace the tabernacle. He begins to gather these supplies. And the Lord prompted the children of Israel to again be generous. But notice David's words. "Now therefore, our God, we thank you and praise your glorious name. But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to offer so willingly as this? For all things come from you, and of your own we have given you. For we are aliens and pilgrims before you, as were all our fathers. Our days on earth are as a shadow, and without hope. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have prepared to build you a house for your holy name is from your hand and is all your own." Lord, we're just giving you what you already have yourself. He doesn't need our stuff. It all belongs to him already. What he really wants is our heart, isn't it? The Apostle Paul told that to the Corinthians as they were preparing to give to help the needy saints back in Judea who were under famine. And he says the Lord was looking for willing and joyful givers, people who gladly gave, because that symbolized that their heart had been given to God first. and thus whatever they had already belonged to God, so it was easy to give to God. Even though it would not be something that could be easily replaced, as in the case here. They were going to sow generously, not grudgingly, in order that they could reap the blessing. So they were gifted to give, and they gave gladly to the Lord's work, to have a place for him to dwell. But here's the reality. They weren't gifted pieces of a tabernacle to put together. They were gifted other things, rings and jewelry and things like that. Things that would have been more practical for themselves. But they gave it, but now someone had to work it into what was needed to build the tabernacle. We needed some people who would be gifted for the work. And if you read that section between Exodus 25 and 31, you know these guys' names. But we're going to see them here in Exodus 35. They come to the top here in verse 30. And Moses said to the children of Israel, "See, the Lord is called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And he has filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom and understanding, in knowledge and all manner of workmanship, to design artistic works, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting jewels for setting, in carving wood, to work in all manner of artistic workmanship. He has put in his heart the ability to teach. In him and Oholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. He has filled them with skill to do all manner of work of the engraver and the designer and the tapestry maker, in blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and fine linen, and of the weaver, those who do every work, and those who design artistic works, and Bezalel and Oholiab, and every gifted artisan in whom the Lord has put wisdom and understanding to know how to do all manner of work for the service of the sanctuary, shall do according to all that the Lord has commanded." And so they are called by God and gifted for the work. Did you notice that? He was filled him with the Spirit of God. This is a unique phrase, and probably pretty safe to say you won't see it used quite this way again until when? The New Testament. When the Apostle Paul and Peter talk about people being filled with the Spirit and gifted for the work of the ministry in the church. Some of it is amazing, with healings and speaking in languages and prophesying. Others of it is just being an administrator and being generous and helping, serving. And so here we have these men. They've been filled with the Spirit of God. When they were looking for deacons in Acts chapter 6 to be leaders, what did they look for? They looked for people who were filled with the Spirit of God. You could tell God was working within them. How? Well, they had the fruit of the Spirit, of course. They walked in the Spirit, not in the lust of the flesh. And being filled with the Spirit of God, he gifted them in wisdom. They were wise about what needed to be done, in understanding and how to work with others, and to understand what needed done and what order it needed done, in knowledge. These guys make Michelangelo and Da Vinci look like, run-of-the-mill craftsmen, because these guys knew a lot of skill sets. And in all manner of workmanship. They were working with things with their hands and with their minds, and in artistry with mediums like wood, with gemstones, with metallurgy, with tapestries, putting artistry into all of these things. And they weren't going to do it alone. They were going to be able to teach others who already had skills in these areas. So we see both natural gifting, natural skills, but also spiritually gifted. And so these guys, with the men and women, did you notice that? There were men and women who would work with them to make the yarns and the tapestries, working together in all these things to know how to do all manner of work for the service of the sanctuary. Men and women working together. And this is worth noting because I noticed it in the footnotes and thought about it before then. It specifically points out that it was men and women working together, because in the patriarchal societies around Israel, the women would have been ignored. But God doesn't ignore them. He sees their work just as important as the men. And so they are contributing in the worship of the Lord, to do all that the Lord had called them to do. In fact, it is seen as a national effort when you look at these verses here. That women spinning the yarns and the hairs and working with their hands, the men doing so also. And it's worth noting, there is so much going into this. It's interesting that the whole thing is prefaced with Exodus 35, verses 1 through 3, a reminder, but don't work on the Sabbath. This is an important work for the Lord, but don't work on the Sabbath. Still take your day off. Work shall be done for 6 days, and the seventh day shall be a holy day for you, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. They were still to honor the Sabbath. What they were doing was not too important to not honor the Sabbath. And this is interesting to me. It doesn't seem to have hindered productivity at all to have taken a day off. In fact, obedience produces abundance. Obedience produces abundance. Let's pick up where we left off in Exodus 36. Then Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab, and every gifted artisan in whose heart the Lord had put wisdom, everyone whose heart was stirred to come and do the work. So this is the men and the women led by Bezalel and Aholiab. And they received from Moses all the offering which the children of Israel had brought for the work of the service of making the sanctuary. So they continued bringing to him freewill offerings every morning. So each morning they were bringing more. It's like, oh, look at this. Let's give this to the Lord. Oh, I found this. Let's give this to the Lord. There may be something supernatural going on. It isn't said, but it may be implied. So they keep bringing more and more. Then all the craftsmen who were doing all the work of the sanctuary came, each from the work he was doing, and they spoke to Moses, saying, the people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded us to do. So Moses gave a commandment, and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, saying, let neither man nor woman do any more work for the offering of the sanctuary. And the people were restrained from bringing, for the material they had was sufficient for all the work to be done. Indeed, too much. Their hearts were so moved with generosity, they were giving more than what was needed for the sanctuary, so that nobody was moved to poverty in this process. The Lord provided through his people for the work for him. They may have went into it thinking we're going to have to give sacrificially, but God provided abundantly more. It is God who works in you both to will and to do according to his good pleasure. And so their obedience produced abundance. They gave, and the craftsmen worked, and everyone was working by the Spirit in obedience to what God had commanded. And so it goes through in rest of 36, 37, 38, 39. It is kind of hard to read, but it's exciting in some ways as you realize there's so much going into, and God notices every detail in the building of the tabernacle because he gave those details to Moses and to Bezalel and Aholiab, which chapter 37 verse 1 is the answer to a great trivia question if there's anything trivial in the Bible, and it is, who made the Ark of the Covenant? It wasn't Moses, it was Bezalel. Bezalel made the Ark of acacia wood, and it tells how he did that. He had the picture of what cherubim looked like. We're not real sure what cherubim look like, but Bezalel did, and he's the one that made them. And no one else would see them except the high priest once a year, because that would be closed off, but his fingerprints would be on it. And so as they completed up this work, I want you to notice in Exodus 39, I'm going to read verse 32 and then a couple more verses. Thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished, and the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so they did. And because I think you might just read that and not realize the significance of it, it says it again in verse 42 and 43. According to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so the children of Israel did all the work. Then Moses looked over all the work, and indeed they had done it. As the Lord had commanded, just so they had done it, and Moses blessed them. Because here's the amazing thing. It was the people of Israel obeying. You won't get that explanation very often in the wilderness wanderings. But in this instance, they obeyed God. And Moses could look over it and say, wow, this is exactly what God was wanting. The children of Israel did all the work. And go with that and realize, again, go back to the whole Bezalel built the ark. It wasn't Moses. Moses is to the background in this whole section because the people as a nation were obedient to God. They do the work. They are obedient. They made a place for the presence of God in their hearts and in their camp. And so at this moment, it's a beautiful picture of what is taking place. Just as the Lord had shown Moses, so they did. And thus the Lord moves into the tent. You know, it's really good here at the end of this here. It says, and the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Verse 35, and Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. He accepted their work, and he moved within. Now, like I said, he would be in their presence. They prepared a place for his presence. But the access was not yet open to them. Only the high priest would be able to go in to the Holy of Holies. And then only once a year. And then only with blood. But Christ opened the way for us. The veil is torn. He, who is the fulfilling of the temple tabernacle, God in our midst, God with us, Emmanuel, has now came and opened the way. And how do we know? Because that same Spirit has came and indwelled us, so that we are little mini temple tabernacles. And we have access to the mercy seat. Anytime. Are we taking it? Are we taking that opportunity? I pray that we see in this the picture of Christ and the picture of what Christ has done for us. And that we worship then in purity, in holiness, crying out for his mercy and grace in the times that we fail, because he desires to dwell with us. Thank you for joining me. God bless you, and we'll see you next week, Lord willing.